Hi, welcome back to another episode of Connected World Podcast with me, Steve.
And me, Steve. So hopefully you saw our previous video where we introduced ourselves, so we won't start with that again today, but we'll delve a bit straight into it, I suppose. So last time we spoke about the trends that we're seeing in manufacturing, things like lights out manufacturing, Industry 5, connected worker, AI, machine learning. And I suppose what we wanted to do here was dive a little bit more into some of the technologies that might enable these things to happen that we're seeing today, and provide some, I suppose, thoughts around how they can deliver value rather than being technology for technology's sake, which was kind of our key point last time. So to kick us off, I'd say, obviously, one of the key things behind all of this is data, isn't it? We can't do any of these things without getting data on how the machines are running, how the line's producing, the quality of the product, and this kind of thing. What are some of the things that you're hearing? I suppose people might call it data ops, how we get data faster, of better quality, and so on. What are the technologies you're hearing about in terms of data ops that would enable this movement?
Well, a clear example for me is IIoT devices. And obviously we had this terminology when we talked about Industry 4, and we've got it again with Industry 5. I think for me, and I think I said it, alluded to it a little bit in the last podcast, but with Industry 5, with Industry 3 and 4, it was often about how good is your factory, how good's your automation network, are all your devices connected, what's your IT network like, and all of these kinds of things. Is that good enough to be able to get to the data? Are all your PLCs networked, etc.? Whereas with Industry 5 and the evolution of technology now, you don't need a good implementation of Industry 3 or 4. You can start immediately. You can get IIoT devices relatively cheaply these days. You can put them onto your equipment. A lot of them are, battery powered, so you don't even have to run power to them. They'll talk wirelessly with Bluetooth or wireless communications, and you can be up and running quite quickly. You don't need to spend a huge amount of capital to get going with Industry 5. I think that's a clear difference. There needs to be a mindset change. You don't need to start with a big bang approach.
Okay. And for people who might not be familiar with the term, IIoT, we're both struggling even to say it. So it's the Industrial Internet of Things, isn't it? So I guess people have probably heard of IoT and are familiar with this concept of
smart devices.
Smart devices being called a thing, being connected to the internet, and the extra I on the start, I suppose, is just the fact that you're doing that in an industrial setting. So these devices may come with additional security or stuff that make them suitable for manufacturing, or they may be ruggedized or whatever, suitable for particular conditions on a factory floor. So yeah, in terms of the devices now, like you say, are more self-contained, so we don't necessarily need a more traditional infrastructure behind it to get data from the shop floor. I think that's critical, isn't it? I think you gave the example of Bluetooth battery-powered sensors. So we're using them for condition monitoring applications now, aren't we?
Yeah, for example, yeah.
Yeah, and that's made a real big difference because what it's allowed people to do, condition monitoring, even only a few years ago, was reserved for very critical infrastructure, expensive equipment, because putting sensors in, running wires, running cables that can do high-speed data capture of vibrations is expensive. And so the value, the return on an investment for maybe a manufacturer who's monitoring a less critical asset just wasn't there. However, what IIoT has done is kind of made those sensing technology much more accessible. And like you say, there's no wires. You stick it onto the machine. You don't have to run cables. You don't need... so the speed to install is much faster. And it means that actually now you can get a really good return on investment on things like condition monitoring or vibration analysis that you couldn't previously, because the technology just, although it existed, it was just too costly to implement.
Exactly. And a lot of these applications out there now, they're quite often subscription as well, or SaaS, software as a service. And so you can not only can you be up and running quite quickly, you don't have to get your budgets in place. You can spend out of your OpEx fund each month, just pay as you go if you like.
Yeah.
So you can quite, not only can you get up and running quickly, you can, like I say, pay as you go and turn these things on and off as you wish. Add more sensors, remove sensors.
I think you're right, because that is, for me, it's the same with cloud technologies, that it's the scalability, isn't it now? It's the ability to start small with a small project, realize the value from it, prove the value of it, get some smaller return on investment, and then use that to build and do more. Whereas previously, we saw, I remember probably it was only 5 years ago at a conference, one of the big pharmaceutical companies talking about how they're going to put infrastructure everywhere. They're going to get all of this data, for every single data point from every PLC. They're going to, spend millions on this infrastructure to get all that data. And someone, I don't think it was me, asked, well, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with the data? And they said, well, we don't know yet. And it's like, so, that mindset now just doesn't need to exist. It's like, why are you getting all the data when you have no idea what you're going to do with it yet? Now IIoT allows you to say, well, actually, I've got a problem and I want to know the answer to this question. And actually, I think I need those 3 bits of data over there, and I don't have a sensor for that one, so I'll just go and buy one and stick it there.
And that example you gave is a great example of where the technology's coming first. They've heard that they should be doing this. They've heard they should be collecting all this data and putting it in a data lake or a data warehouse or whatever buzzword they've heard. But they've got no strategy. They don't know what they're going to do with the data. They don't know why they're doing it. They don't know what the business benefit is. And so people have got to move away from this technology comes first approach and more towards what's in it for the worker, or what's the return on investment, what's in it for the business.
Yeah. And I suppose it's, it is a technology first thing, but also it was probably the only way to do it then for a while was this Purdue model of sensors at this layer, get them to a PLC, get them to a SCADA, get them to an MES, get them to an ERP system, and then or a cloud or a data lake, like you say. But now there's other models or techniques where the data doesn't have to pass through all those layers. I think previously, you could think of those layers as being like different time frames. So the PLC would be dealing like sub-second, SCADA would be kind of second, sub-minute stuff. MES might be sub-hour, minute data. And the ERP might be hourly stuff, looking at it on a daily basis. So whereas now, storage of data is cheap and people want to just move that real-time information around to all of those layers. And so one of the ways people are doing that now is with this concept of a UNS, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you know about UNS?
Yeah, well, so UNS, if you haven't heard of it, is Unified Namespace. It's something that we're hearing a lot from our customers and our peers. And it's actually not a new concept. It's been around for quite a while. It's just, I think with the evolution of technology and the need for stakeholders at different levels of the business to have access to this data, it's now becoming more prevalent again. And we talk about data ops and OT, IT convergence. I think UNS is a really good example of bridging the gap between operational technology and IT. The two different resources, if you like, or two different worlds.
Yeah.
And I know that recently we did some work for one of our customers about UNS. I think you worked on it.
Yeah.
So what did you learn from that? What were your key takeaways?
Well, I guess a bit about how the concept works. And I suppose UNS itself is a concept, as in the idea is that you have a namespace. So they call it a semantic hierarchy. So basically a hierarchy of names that make sense to a human reading them. So we're not talking about PLC addresses and things like that. Arranged in a nice hierarchy, it might follow ISO 95, enterprise site area line, might follow a nice structure. And then the unified bit is that it's common across your enterprise. So you could go to any factory and you know that the data is going to be in the same place. So that's the kind of unified namespace concept. And then there are any number of ways to kind of implement that. And the most common one that seems to be emerging now is using MQTT and having a centralized broker that has the namespace built in it. So, and a lot of the benefits that come from using a unified namespace or using MQTT is that it is a publish subscribe model. So rather than you having to make lots of point-to-point connections between bits of equipment. So we talked about maybe getting information from the PLC to the SCADA, but you might want that information in the MES, you might want it in the ERP. That before might be 3 or 4 different point-to-point connections. With a UNS, it's a centralized repository with the latest data in it. So topics, they call them topics, but basically we might think of them as PLC tags or, data gets published to the UNS, to the central place, and then anything can subscribe to that data, and they can subscribe to just the data that they want. So it's done by exception as well. So you're not polling a device to see if it's changed. It will update you when and only when it's changed. So the value that brings is that you're not constantly maintaining all these different connections. So you replace one piece of hardware, you don't have to suddenly rewrite at that point-to-point connection.
And also it's a single source of truth as well. So if 10 systems want the OE number, value for line 1, they're all getting the same number. They don't care about how that number's calculated. They don't need to worry about the raw data that makes that number up. They can just go and get that value straight from the UNS.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. And obviously the system that's generating that number is doing all of the calculations and the logic, and so that's something they don't need to worry about. Yeah,
so that's right. So like the ownership or the stewardship of that data remains with the system of source. So OE is a good example. You see people copying the raw data. You need to calculate OE out into a spreadsheet, Power BI, whatever, and then doing their own calculation on it and coming up with a number that's similar but slightly different.
Exactly. Everyone's got their own way of doing things.
Yeah.
So talking about UNS, and obviously we just talked about IIoT before that, and how these smart devices can be used to scale as big or as small as you like.
Mm-hmm.
Can the same be said for UNS? And is UNS just for large enterprises, or can it also be for small to medium businesses too?
Yeah. Good question, because although we're probably the customers that are talking to us about it are the big enterprise customers. However, the thing with something like UNS, the same as IIoT, is it's super scalable. So you can really start small. You can get a free MQTT broker, and literally, so if you've got engineers who like to have a play, you can literally get that up and running for no cost. We're seeing more and more devices that support MQTT out of the box. So yeah, if we're talking about that kind of idea of starting small, doing something, and then growing it, then UNS is a great place to start, because you mean to go on, I suppose. That can grow with you. You can switch out that broker to an enterprise scale 1 designed specifically for UNS. And so yeah, it's definitely not just for the big players. It's a tool that the SMEs can be adopting now as well.
Obviously, that's a good point to make, but I guess we could fall into that trap of just talking about the technology and not thinking about why are we doing this. So do we really think small to medium companies would benefit from implementing a UNS? Because for me, I think the answer is probably no, and I think they should probably just be starting with those smart devices and these SaaS applications that are out there, and getting up and running with something that's going to bring value to the business. UNS could come down the road as they grow.
Yeah. You think you're probably right. For if it's a very much a one-off first stab at something where you want to get some data, visualize it, that kind of thing, then yeah, you get an off-the-shelf package, comes with a SaaS thing, you're ready to go. But very, very quickly, someone's going to say, oh, that's good data. Can I get this into this application? Yeah. And can I get it into that application? And at that point, then you could go straight down the route of, oh yeah, I'll just build you a connection. Or you could start looking at, well, hang on, could I put a UNS in? And it's not going to be a full-blown UNS at that point. It's going to be an MQT broker with a topic in it.
Yeah.
But it's the right path to be going down before you start building point-to-point connections.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great point. And so to summarize, I think, there's all this technology out there, these smart devices, there's terms like UNS and concepts like UNS. But for companies, especially small to medium companies, you can start small with a phased approach, a strategic phased approach, considering that business value. You don't have to go big bang, and you can just take one step at a time. So thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll be back with another one where we'll deep dive into AI and machine learning. Thanks very much.
Thank you.